Thank you for joining us. You've seen how stories from the past, from both books and comics, can inspire us with courage and creativity. Here on the Fulmo Talk series, we carry that spirit forward into the world of ideas. The Fulmo Talk series 2025 has been created to highlight the Fulmo platform. The Fulmo platform was initially created to address the student suicide crisis in India. It has since grown into a full-fledged games hub with happiness practices paired with games. These happiness practices are designed to cultivate resilience, optimism, and gratitude. This talk series has been developed in association with the Esperanto and Conlang Society of South India. Some of the sentences spoken in the introduction and conclusion are in Esperanto, but no knowledge of Esperanto is needed since we always translate all sentences into English. In fact, my knowledge of Esperanto is not very high, so I've often been reading from a script. Today, we are grateful to have you with us as we explore new perspectives together. Today's talk continues Fulmo's journey, full of insight and thought. So, let's begin. Saluton and bonjour. Welcome to another edition of the Fulmo Talk series. We are excited to present another edition of the Fulmo Talk series where curiosity meets insight. Hodiaŭ ni renkontas eksperton, kiu povas ŝanĝi la manieron, kiel vi povas pensi pri sia fako. Today, we'll meet an expert who may change the way you think about their field. Ĉi tiu diskuto promesas estas riĉa je perspektivoj. This discussion promises to be rich with perspectives. Please join me in welcoming our speaker, Dr. Jacob Verghese. Dr. Jacob Verghese began his career in the Indian Railways after completing his apprenticeship at Jamalpur in 1970 and earning a doctorate from BITS Pilani. He held several key positions, including Deputy RA at the Indian Embassy in Paris, and later served as Director and Executive Director at the Railway Board before retiring in 1995. Following a period as a freelance consultant with organizations like the UNDP, the World Bank, and TCS, he founded Stiag Energy Services in 2001, serving as Managing Director until 2016 and later as Chairman. He currently serves as Chairman. With extensive experience across the energy sector, he brings a deep understanding of the ongoing energy transition and global consultancy operations. So without further ado, let me hand the stage over to Dr. Jacob Verghese. Dr. Verghese, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Anand, and thank you for this opportunity to make this presentation on the future of energy. Actually, I should trace the future of electricity in India and in the globe. Energy, of course, is something which is impacting our lives in many ways. We need it for our sustenance, we need it for heating, we need it for cooking, we need it for transportation, and we need it for a lot of the manufacturing and process industry. If you hark back to several centuries ago, each country had its own source of energy, whether it was wood or water or coal. It all depended on where these forms of energy were available. But if you look at the eras, the first major breakthrough was when the steam engine was invented and coal became in great demand for transportation. Many countries had coal as a resource, natural resource, and therefore it was not really something which led to conflict between nations. It was the invention of the internal combustion engine which then drove up the demand for oil. And oil was located in several countries too, but not in the countries where industrial progress was happening. And therefore oil became a area of bone of contention between many nations. It could start to influence geopolitics in a manner which was never seen before. And until, say, the early 50s, it was becoming actually a flashpoint. But then thereafter, I think oil was something where it was accepted that it belonged to the people where the country, where it was located, and it was exported worldwide. Later, of course, gas had a similar role, and Chancellor Merkel in Germany did something very wise into the future because she bound Russia, which had plentiful supplies of gas, with Europe. And therefore, the Russian bear, to some extent, was kept quiet. Then came Ukraine, as you know, and then, of course, the complete impact of energy on geopolitics is now playing out, especially with a lot of demands coming on India to stop buying oil from Russia on the premise that it's fueling the war in Ukraine. The aspect of energy, which is actually more important than the impact it has on geopolitics, is the aspect of climate change. All fossil fuels are contributing to the greenhouse effect, which, of course, results in higher global temperatures, which, of course, brings about very unpredictable climate events, which are now causing havoc around the world. As you can see, it's a problem which we feel intensely in India with unseasonal rain, floods, and happening in the north and the south, and causing catastrophes, which, if unchecked, will go forward much more rapidly than we are seeing it now. It was a glimmer of hope when in COP21 in Paris, all nations agreed to limit the increase in global temperature to 2 degrees, because that was what was the limit which the world could survive in. And I believe we are already crossed 1.5 degrees, and we have a little window left. And that is where renewable energy comes in as a savior. It would be interesting to look at how the mix of energy is taking place and how the energy transition is taking place globally. And then we'll come to India after that. So put the next slide, please. If you can see on this slide, this is a slide of a prediction of what is going to happen by 2030. And solar is set to quadruple, and wind is likewise going to increase substantially. But you'll notice that coal comes down dramatically. And all others forms of sources of electricity, such as gas, hydro, nuclear, will all remain more or less stagnant. I don't think they will grow very much because there are difficulties with each of these sources of electricity. Gas is limited. Hydro has a lot of social effects for land acquisition, and so there are a lot of resistance to that. Nuclear is also similarly objected to in large number of nations. And so I think the growth will be there, but it will be significantly lower than solar and wind. Go to the next slide, please, just to come to India. You perhaps also know that energy consumption is directly related to GDP growth. And if you look at this little table here, you can see India's GDP growth being far in excess of the average and of the world, as well as the emerging markets and the advanced economies. Of course, the projected GDP growth for 2025 has just been revised, I think yesterday or day before yesterday, to 6.6 by the IMF. So India is going to have a large demand for energy, and this is probably the reason where we have a big role to play in the future. Next slide. The Indian power sector in 2025, just to have a quick snapshot of where we stand, the capacity in gigawatts are shown up on the screen. Coal is 223 gigawatts, or 45% of our installed capacity. And renewables are at 187. Hydro is not classified as a renewable in India except small hydro. So renewables is primarily solar and wind, and of course some biomass and a few other non-conventional areas of electricity production. Though this looks good at the moment, you might see that it's less than half of the installed capacity is now coal, though we are still building coal plants. The next slide, please. If you look at the renewable energy, you might notice that solar power is the dominant form of renewable energy. It's at about 120 gigawatts at the moment, and followed by wind power, biopower, and small hydro are reasonably insignificant as far as renewable energy is concerned, though they have a lot of potential. So we have a total of 188 gigawatts, which is planned to be increased substantially. If you go to the next slide. However, despite this large increase in solar and wind, when it comes to the actual generation of power, you will see that coal still dominates dramatically in this pie chart, which you see on the screen. Almost 70% of India's consumption comes from coal plants because they work 24/7 to 365, unlike a solar plant, which works only when the sun is shining, and the wind power works only when the wind is blowing. So I think we have a situation where installed capacity is substantial, but the contribution to the electricity pool is much less. And this situation will continue for a reasonable period of time, even though capacities in each of these sources will increase. So the next one will give you that idea. Number 7. Here you can see that the RE generation, which is in yellow, is rising. But when you look at the blue, which is the coal generation share, it is increasing much faster, and it still remains quite dominant. So we have never, so if you look at it in percentages of consumption of the generation share, the growth is very, very slow. So the last, say, 5 or 6 years, if you look at it, it's hovered around 21, 22%, and it's just managed to cross 22 in last financial year. So it's a very slow growth as far as the generation share is concerned. You go to the next slide, please. The growth per se, of course, is good. As you can see here, that we started small in 2010, and now in 2025, 26, we are at a very substantially much higher figure. As I mentioned, 188 gigawatts, which is quite creditable, but not perhaps enough. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see here that the solar sector growth in recent years, there is a dramatic increase last year, but still, if you look at the growth rate, it's not sufficient because it's not yet something which has taken off in a meaningful way. We had major, targets set, and I think the next slide will show you. If you go to the next slide, which is on wind. Wind, likewise, is not much of an addition of capacity, as you might see, all these years. So it's going up very, very slowly, despite the fact that we have 6,000 kilometers of coastline, or 6,000 kilometers plus of coastline, where there is a lot of scope for wind generation, wind power generation. But a lot of generation possibilities are there offshore. But somehow, I think is capital formation or what is the problem? We are not able to make a big dent, though 24-25 was quite substantial. So if you go to the next slide, we'll give you our targets. So as per the Central Electricity Authority, the country's solar and wind will make up 51% of the total installed capacity by 2030. But today we have 119 and 52, and so we need to add about 80 gigawatts a year till 2030. And we have somehow been able to do only half that in the recent years. So if we have to achieve these targets, there has to be a real upswing in both in wind and solar, and we'll have to see how that is going to be achieved. There are indications, because large solar fields are being auctioned off. There are indications that there will be a substantial uptick in the next couple of years. But whether we will meet these targets, at the moment, I'm pessimistic. Go to the next slide, please. The next big holy grail, as they call it, is hydrogen. And hydrogen has the great ability of leaving no waste behind. So if you burn hydrogen, it just leaves water as a waste. And so there is a lot of hope being centered around hydrogen, but it makes sense only when you produce hydrogen from green electricity. Because at the moment, the only way to produce hydrogen the only substantial way to produce hydrogen is by electrolysis. And if electrolysis has to happen, it needs electricity. So if you have to use electricity, you also have to ensure that it is green electricity. That means coming out of solar, wind, or nuclear, or hydro, or whatever. And then only it makes sense to convert it to hydrogen, which can then in turn be used either for transportation or for electricity also. But we have now a target to have 5 million tons of hydrogen by 2030 for domestic consumption. We also have a target to produce 15 to 20 million tons of steel, or green steel as they call it, so that you replace the fossil fuels in the manufacture of steel by using hydrogen, which will not produce any emissions. And internally, there is also a manufacturing capacity being set up to the extent of 25 gigawatts by 2028. So if all this comes, and there will be sufficient hydrogen, the hydrogen has its own set of problems because transportation is not so simple. Existing pipelines can be used with a certain percentage of hydrogen being mixed with the natural gas, but not substantially more. So a lot of production will have to take place very close to the consumption points. And therefore, yes, it has a lot of potential, but we have to see how this plays out with some other developments which are also happening in the world. Nuclear, is not being pursued by a large number of countries. Fission, because there's always the problem of waste and the problem of contamination and radiation. But as you perhaps know, there is a lot of work going on fusion. And if the first nuclear plants are made with fusion, which people expect at least pilots to be available by 2030. Everybody is racing to make that. The US, USSR, I think China, India are all, Germany also, I think, is working on this. It is quite possible that this, if it is proved safe, might impact hydrogen in many ways. So we have to still wait and see. It can impact it positively also because if the nuclear power can be used to create hydrogen, then hydrogen can be used in transportation in a substantial way. Can we go to slide 13, please? Yeah, the government of India has taken a lot of strategic moves on this. They are hoping to become first movers on hydrogen. And one of the important ways of transporting hydrogen is to use it by manufacturing ammonia and moving the ammonia, because that ammonia then doesn't have the same risks, safety risks, which moving hydrogen has. So ammonia projects are coming up in India. As you know, some have already been auctioned off, and some which you see on the screen with the prices which you see on the screen is what has been awarded. And hopefully, if this happens, then we have a good export market also, because hydrogen from green sources is very much in demand in Europe and many other countries. And so recently, the first big deal on this was signed with Oman and Europe, Germany and Oman, I think, with the Netherlands providing the logistics. So I think this will become also a very important area which will impact the energy flows and the energy production. The next one, naturally, when you have energy being produced from solar and from wind, solar is available only when there is sunlight. That means the night, there's no production. And likewise, wind, the ebbs and flows, both seasonal and during the day, results in production which cannot be necessarily directly used. And if it is available, you could use many methods of storing it so that it could be used when required. And pump storage is one of the things which is being talked about. It's expensive. So you really pump up water during the times when the energy is available, and then you use that water to run generators, hydroelectric generators, during the times of peak demand, because it comes on, switches on instantly. Yeah, the next way of storing energy is in batteries. There's been a steep fall in the price of batteries. And there's a lot of work going on in India and abroad on finding alternate. Can you go to the next slide? It's not switched to the next slide. Yeah. There is a lot of work going on to substitute the more rare metals which are used in batteries with readily available material. And so I think the prices of batteries will come down substantially in the coming years. It's already come down substantially, but it will come down even more. And in that case, I think pump storage will be a thing of the past, because that has a lot of just long gestation period, as well as socio political impact on the people who live there. So batteries are expected to become a large source of storage now. So if you look at the next slide, you will find that India has a big capacity for a big plan to increase their storage capacity, and already several thousands megawatts worth of battery storage is under execution, with more on the way. So if we can look at this from a point of view of what it can do to the climate, because that's the most important part of this whole debate, is if solar, wind, fusion, hydrogen, if they all come in, we would have managed to control the global heating substantially, and then I think the planet can survive. But it all depends on how this progresses, and it's quite difficult to say how it will progress. So yeah, that brings me to the end of my talk. And if there are questions, I don't know how it is to be dealt with, whether it happens that you write to me or later on one-to-one. I'd be happy to answer them.
Oh, thank you very much for a very engaging talk, Dr. Verghese. Ni esperas que la conversación tie motivas vin provi novain ideoin. We hope that this conversation motivates you to try new ideas, everyone. Gis revido en la venonta Fulmo Talk Series. See you next time at the next Fulmo Talk Series. But before that, I do want to add a few comments about Dr. Jacob Verghese. In addition to being someone I know through people I know in the railways, he also happens to be an IIT Madras alum. And I happened to see this talk when he was giving it to a number of railway officers. And I thought I would invite him to the Fulmo Talk Series. And this talk turned out to be a fantastic one. So thank you very much, Dr. Verghese, for a wonderful talk. And thank you for your patience throughout this process. In fact, I had just given a guest lecture at IIT Madras just earlier this month. And, I was talking about the BCG matrix, the GE McKinsey matrix. And I would say, I even compiled some notes on this, if we applied a BCG matrix lens, solar and EV, right now would look like stars because there's high market growth, there's high government backing, and there's rising adoption. But traditional coal plants, even though they are not highly regarded by environmentalists, they are still cash cows because they generate steady returns. And despite the fact they may not have as much high growth as, say, solar, they're still part of the energy mix. And so it's really quite interesting to see how these sectors are shaping up, especially given that I just came back to India last year and I'm looking at things anew. And so it's just so exciting to see all these wonderful happenings going on in India. So on that note of wonder, let me just close with one more sentence in Esperanto. I'm supposed to use some Esperanto, everyone, so I throw him some Esperanto. Dankon al ĉiuj. That means thanks to everyone. See you again next time on the Fulmo Talk series. Until then.